And I'm just so glad to have my very good friend Garrett from Neufit. Uh, Garrett has a really interesting healing story of his own in terms of how he discovered the power of electrical stimulation and how powerful that can be for improving your function as part of your rehabilitation program. Now, Garrett, now forgive me, I don't know how to properly say your last name, so I don't want to get it wrong. Saltpeter, Saltpeter?
You
Mike?
got it.
Okay. So everyone, welcome Garrett. Garrett, so tell us your background and how you discovered and got so passionate about electrical therapy.
Absolutely. Thank you, first of all, Dr. Wallace, for having me on here. It's a pleasure to be able to continue to work with you and all the Walls warriors out there. We've seen some incredible things happen, and we're just so grateful to be able to work with someone who's so aligned and so congruent with our mission. And just thank you for all of your work. So, to actually answer your question, my entry point into this work came as an athlete. So I was originally looking more from the standpoint of sports injuries. My last year playing college ice hockey, I had some torn ligaments in my wrist. I was supposed to be out for 3 months and have surgery. And I had this really serendipitous experience wherein I met a chiropractic neurologist. And for the first time, he introduced me to the notion of functional neurology and taking more of a functional approach as opposed to a structural approach, taking a functional approach to something that was typically very squarely in the orthopedic realm. And so I worked with him. We focused on activating the muscles around my injured ligaments. We used earlier, more primitive versions of direct current to accelerate the healing. And it was this amazing, I call it my eureka moment, where
Mhm.
my ligaments healed in 2.5 weeks instead of 3 months. I avoided surgery altogether. And that is really a pivotal transformative experience for me, because that's when I just started to feel this calling inside of myself to share this work with as many people as I could. And I had no idea at the time what it would look like, but I
And
that set me off on this journey.
what were you studying at that time?
So I was studying. I got a physics degree. I was still an undergrad. I got a physics degree, and I was already set to come to graduate school in engineering.
Perfect. So we have someone who's into science, into physics, into engineering, has this transformative healing experience. And how did that inform your next step in the engineering world?
So in a couple ways. One kind of counterintuitive. So I came to graduate school in engineering, and I was doing my curriculum. I shifted, became more interested in electronic, uh, electrical engineering, and more interested in electronics because of my experience with direct current. So it kind of shifted my focus. And then my first summer, when I was supposed to be doing research in the lab, I ended up going and apprenticing with this original doctor who had helped me heal these ligaments and made this profound impact on me. So I did that, and then I ended up. It was originally going to be a PhD program. I ended up leaving early with a master's in order to start a clinic here in Austin. Partnered with a different chiropractor here in town, and started using earlier versions of direct current and some of those techniques I had learned, from a few mentors, from self-study, and that was about 12 years ago. And uh, kind of pivoted and started doing this. But in the back of my mind, I had this engineering experience and was always thinking about what things I'd like to see the technology be able to do and improvements I'd like to make in the technology. And eventually, after 5 or 6 years, that that voice just got overwhelmingly louder and louder and louder. And so I finally took on the responsibility of improving direct current stimulation, and then working on the what led to the Neubie device.
So clearly there's a little entrepreneur in you as well, because it's a lot of work to make new things. And so you and I have our newbies in the background, and it certainly has been, I think everyone knows that electrical current and all of the work that I did with electrical stimulation with a physical therapist who had an athletic practice and then treated me, as he did his athletes, with steady progression. And I must say, I mean, I worked pretty hard as an athlete to achieve what I was able to achieve, but actually worked much, much harder as a patient trying to get my life back. And eSTEM was definitely part of that. And so I've been a huge, huge champion for using electrical therapy to accelerate recovery. And so, what I love about Garrett's work and what I love about you is that you are so comfortable with using electrical stimulation as part of rehabilitation. And I see that you have a much more comprehensive approach to how to accelerate people's recovery. Can you tell us more about your programs and how your device is different than many of the other devices that are available?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I love that you dropped in there was how you worked with a physical therapist who tends to work with more of an athletic population. And I even talking about my background as an athlete, and some people might be listening and think, well, I'm an MS patient, or I have a neurodegenerative disease. Like, why would I work with someone who works with athletes? And the answer is that if you if you are an MS patient and because of MS you've lost function, you have weakness or sensory deficits, or you've lost coordination, or you're impaired in some way, if you want to have a chance to regain that function, you are going to have to train like an athlete in order to drive neuroplastic changes, to harness this capacity that we all have for neuroplasticity. You're going to have to, not going to physical therapy 30 to 60 minutes twice a week is not going to be nearly enough input, not nearly enough stimulus, not nearly enough work to drive your body, to signal your body to make those changes. And so if you think about how an athlete trains, think about someone who's training for the Olympics or to be a professional athlete. They're training a few hours a day of focused, intense work daily, on a daily basis, and not just for a week or a month, but for months and months and months, for years. And that's the level of commitment that it takes to restore function. And it's so in terms of this notion of treating patients like athletes, I think it's really important that we understand the prerequisite, the level of work that it takes in order to drive those changes. And if people, it's almost as an MS patient, it's almost even more vitally important, because there's a phenomenon, the flip side of that neuroplasticity is called learned disuse, where if you have impairments and you can't use your muscles, you can't engage them as effectively or as completely, then if you're sedentary, you're going to go lose function even more, even faster. Those negative effects are going to compound. Just like the positive effects can compound and build on each other, so too can those negative effects. And the uh, people who are doing an hour of physical therapy twice a week, or doing kind of a more traditional dose, they may be frustrated and say, I'm not making progress, but in reality what they're doing is actually preventing learned disuse. So at that
Mhm.
moderate level, they're actually doing some good for themselves, because they're preventing themselves from getting worse. And so that's something that I do want to hit home. Like, yes, it is, you're absolutely doing something. The fact that you haven't made any progress in a year or however the length of time is, like, yeah, that's disappointing. But if you've preserved function and sealed off against that downside loss, that's good too. So that's one component of it.
It's interesting. So my conventional neurologist, conventional physical therapist, really focused on preventing loss, and that when you have progressive MS, or often when you have MS, the goal is to prevent loss, maintain function. What Garrett and I are talking about is we want to improve function. And you improve function by working the muscle. And so, yes, you could do this through progressive exercise. And that can happen. But thanks to eSTEM, we can accelerate that. And that's what I love about using electrical stimulation of muscles. And that's what I love about Garrett in Garrett's approach is that he is accelerating your recovery through his programs and his devices. So, Garrett, can you go into a little bit more detail about how your device accelerates that recovery beyond just what a progressive exercise program would do?
Absolutely. So electrical stimulation in general, before we even get into the specifics of the newbie and what makes it different, in general, it can allow people to get more work done in less time, allow you to, contract your muscles more than you normally can do on your own. To if there's an equivalent amount of work that you need to do, it can allow you to get there a lot faster. And so generally that's a big part of the value proposition in these types of circumstances. In terms of the Neubie device, you may have heard me earlier. I mentioned that it's direct current, and my initial exposure with my own wrist injury to direct current, how transformative that was. And that's really important as we talk about driving these neurological adaptations, because traditional alternating current devices, they can cause muscles to contract, of course. And the issue there is oftentimes that as they contract, so a little electricity lesson. So alternating current is a signal that goes back and forth. So go up and down and up and positive, negative, positive, negative. Whereas direct current is only going in one direction. And our nervous systems work on direct current as well. So our brain, we have one pathway from our brain down to our body, the motor or efferent side of the nervous system. And our brain sends signals down to the body. That same pathway never carries signals back up from the body to the brain. Those are separate pathways. It's like a highway. On one side, you have northbound traffic. On the other side, you have southbound traffic. You never go the same direction on the same pathway. So direct current is very much is the type of signal that we use. And so conceptually, it kind of makes sense. In terms of the specific applications, when you use alternating current, as you turn it up, before you get to a true maximum load of stimulus or challenge that you can handle, what's going to happen is the muscles are going to lock up, because as that signal goes back and forth, it causes muscles on both sides of the joint to contract at the same time in a kind of unusual or uncoordinated manner. And that's actually the same type of pattern of contraction that can lead to muscles shortening and stiffening. It can also reinforce spasms. And so there's some downsides when you use
Mhm.
alternating current devices. Whereas with the Newbie, with direct current, we're able to send that signal and to some degree bypass, not fully, we're still stimulating the muscles, but to some degree bypass some of that muscular contraction, so more of that signal gets into the sensory input side of the nervous system, so we can create those very powerful signals and stimuli into the nervous system and ultimately to the brain, where there's a tremendous opportunity to drive neuroplastic changes. And it's really it comes down to stimulus and response. We hear that in neurology and psychology, stimulus
Mhm.
response. And so the more stimulus we can get into the nervous system, the greater the opportunity there is for the body to adapt and drive neuroplastic changes. Of course, it depends on, there has to be a robust underlying foundation of good health. The individual has to have the physical resources to support and drive those changes, have the
Yeah.
raw materials, but you need enough of the right type of stimulus. And so that's where these nuances with the type of current and some of the other engineering features of the Newbie really come invaluable.
So again, to the tribe, what Garrett and I are telling you is you want to address the root causes of whatever is driving your neurologic disability. So address diet, toxins, your sleep, get all of that tuned. And now you're in a position where you can begin to rebuild muscle, repair that connection between your brain and your muscles. And you'll do that with exercise. Uh, but by adding in the newbie to those training sessions, you can accelerate the neuroplastic changes in the brain. You can accelerate and correct me if I'm wrong, Garrett, but my understanding is we accelerate the growth of the myocytes, the health of the myocyte itself in terms of mitochondrial health, and the cellular health by doing that electrical work. Now, you'll still want to exercise. So it's not like you get hooked up to this wonderful machine, which I do love, um, and I just lay there and I grow muscles just laying there. I grow muscles
If only.
because Garrett's physical therapists work with me to design the exercise functional movements that will help address my unique limitations based on all of my health challenges. And then they design my program, the settings, the frequency, and I do my training. And then I periodically check in with my physical therapist, who again assesses where I'm at and advances my program. That's how I get stronger. That's how I can do more push ups. That's how I can do more vertical jumps. It's not just laying there with the machine hooked up. Garrett, do you
That's
want to expand on that any?
absolutely. That is one of the other, we talked about differences between alternating current and direct current. Part of the difference beyond the technology is really how it's used. Traditional e-stim is very passive, where you do just lie there, let the machine, you know, buzz you or zap you. And there's very limited benefit to that, because part of what we're trying to do is actually improve movement patterns. And in order to do that, there's a component in, or there's a very important concept in neuroscience called the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand. And it means that we're always adapting to exactly what it is that we're doing. So if I'm trying to improve my gait, for example, my walking ability, I am going to have to do some work on my feet, legs, hips. Doing a lot of work on hand dexterity probably is not going to help my gait as much as working on my feet, legs, hips. Working on those muscles and that coordination there. So specificity is very important. And so if we're trying to drive specific movements, of course we're going to have to do those movements. And if you add the sensory, that neurological feedback and input from the Neubie, you can get the equivalent. There's no exact formula, but it's like as if you're doing more movements. If you're doing 3, it's as if you're doing 6 or 9 or 12 of those movements. And because you're getting the input, it amplifies the effect, it amplifies the benefit
Mm-hmm.
of that movement. And so you can really accelerate the rate at which you're making changes and adaptations, and it's being guided because of the movement that you're doing. It's being guided in the right direction from a specificity perspective.
Now, people may be asking what the experience is like. If I come to you and I'm say, okay, Garrett, I'm in a wheelchair. I'd like to be up walking again. What would my experience be like coming to work with you or one of the newbie trained professionals?
That's a great question. So the first thing that I want to say up front is that it's going to take time and effort. I believe we have ways to shorten the time and effort, but if it's something that normally would take 4 years, and you do something amazing, which is cut that time in half, that's still 2 years. So we just want to be clear that it takes time and effort. The experience. One of the things that we typically do to start is, so you see the machine back there, we'll actually connect some pads and scan around on the body with electrodes like this, and we'll look for where the impaired or limited neurological pathways are, again, so we can use this specificity principle to give whoever's listening, if you're trying this yourself, to give you the stimulation that you need on the exact right pathways to help drive the appropriate and
Mm-hmm.
correct neurological changes. So we'll scan around on the body. Then once we find those areas, we'll place the pads there, stimulate those while you go through different movements. And just like Dr. Walls said, we'll coach you and guide, or your practitioner will coach you and guide you and choose the movements that are going to get the most bang for the buck. And then there is also the circumstance where someone might be listening to this and thinking, well, gosh, I'd like to do that, but I can't move. I don't yet have the strength to lift my leg or bend my knee, or whatever the movement is. And so in those cases, that again is where the specificity principle comes in, perhaps even more importantly, because in that case we're thinking, okay, we need to do tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of repetitions of that movement, but if you can't even do one repetition to start,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, it's mind boggling. You might think, how the heck am I going to get to hundreds of thousands if I can't even do one? And the answer is that traditionally speaking, you may not be able to. But if we're able to find these exact pathways and stimulate them with the machine, we can start to get the stimulus on there, create the response within your body, wherein you'll start to, assuming it's within your capacity and resources. Everyone has an individual difference in how much they can respond and adapt. But if it is within your capacity, you will start to upregulate and strengthen those nerve pathways. Just like if you go to the gym and you train your muscles and they get bigger, your nerve pathways can actually regrow, remodel, reinforce, be strengthened. And so we can actually stimulate those exact same pathways and start to build them up to give you a chance to get that first rep and then start to take those next steps to build up to dozens and hundreds and thousands of repetitions.
Now, do you have any stories that you can tell us about some of the Walls warriors who have come and worked with you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So we've had probably a few hundred now, maybe, maybe even a few hundreds have used Neufit. Many of them have worked with providers in our network. So we've certified at this time of this recording about 8 or 900 providers
Mhm.
around North America, and then a few in some other continents and countries. Now we're just received international clearances on the device last year, so expanding internationally as well. But so many people have worked with practitioners, outside of our internal team. With us, we've been blessed to work with several locally here in Austin, and several Walls warriors who have flown in to see us for, typically come down for 3 to 5 days to go through the full assessment evaluation, allow us to build a protocol and do an intensive start together for a few days of intense work. And then, they're able to bring a device home like you have, and do the same type of remote consultation. We can continue to update protocols and provide coaching over video calls just like this. And one that comes to mind, um, is a story that we had talked actually about, a woman named Wendy who came down from Wisconsin. And we talked about how she came down on a previous interview. She came down and did this intensive with us, and in 5 days was able to lift her leg up for the first time in years. Was able to bend down and tie her own shoes, because she had been not only weak but also stiff as a kind of a protective mechanism.
Mhm.
Weakness and stiffness sometimes, it's like the worst of both worlds. But that combination is fairly common. And then um, she took a couple steps holding onto her husband's hand just in that first week, and then she kept working. And her stretch goal at the time that we were working together was to, she's like, oh man, if I could take a few steps holding my husband's hand, that would be awesome. But if I could walk my son down the aisle at his wedding, that would be incredible. And in the time since you and I last spoke, her son's wedding happened, and she actually, after about a year and 4 or 5 months of working with the machine, she was prepared. She was ready to go. She walked her son down the aisle at his wedding, and
I saw that
everyone.
video.
It was, oh my
It's just so
gosh,
beautiful.
it was so inspiring. And she's a true testament. It's not just like you said, it's not just sitting there and letting the machine do the work. She's
Mhm.
doing the work, at least 5 days a week, an hour or two a day. She's on the machine. She's very diligent, and it's an investment, right? And she made the
Sure.
investment, and she got a tremendous return on the investment. And now she also is back. So when she was diagnosed with MS, she had to give up. She became disabled, had to give up many things, including driving, including teaching second grade. She was a teacher. And so she also, in addition to this, achieving this stretch goal of walking her son down the aisle at his wedding, she got her driver's license back. And she's now volunteering at the school where she was teaching decades ago.
And if I recall the story correctly, I think I saw her dancing with her
That's
son
right.
at her son's wedding as well, which, by the way, inspired me because my son is getting married. And so I pitched the idea to him of doing a mother son dance, and that I would take dance lessons so I would do a good job. So we'll see. But you know, uh, Everyone who's listening here, I think I want you to be inspired by that story. Here's a woman who was wheelchair dependent, had difficulty taking even a few steps, had difficulty tying her own shoes. Uh, and she saw immediate gains, small ones, but immediate meaningful gains. And she was willing to work daily towards her goals with Garrett's team's guidance and support. And she achieved remarkable improvements in her function and continues to improve and continues to work out. For me, I continue to do eSTEM. I spent a year not doing eSTEM, and I decided to go back to it because I wanted to continue to have that progressive improvement in that progressive training. So this is part of my daily routine. I get up, do my morning meditation. I hook up and I do my strength training with the E-stim. Now, I'll also take some days where I'm swimming, and so I may or may not fit my E-stim every day. But I certainly value strength training, and I know I can get more out of my strength training if I do it to electricity.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. That's beautiful.
And when my conventional neurologist, had originally told me that I was had such remarkable success, remarkable performance. He convinced me to stop eSTEM, and I did stopped it for a year, and discovered like I was beginning to lose ground, even though I was working out every day without the benefit of the eSTEM. So, I was really quite thrilled when I met Garrett, got back on eSTEM, and Garrett is very comfortable that there's a lot of benefit, particularly for all of us who have a neurologic disorder, to keep the eSTEM going. One, because you might as well continue to progress your strength, conditioning, and your coordination that I can get through the eSTEM. And I am getting more mature. I'm now over 65. And so e- e- age-related senescence begins to happen, and we can anticipate decline in sensory function, decline in motor function. But my goal is to live to 120, still teaching, still playing with any children that I happen to have in my life, and hopefully still doing some research. And I don't want to have age-related senescence. And what do you think, Garrett? Could the Neubie help prevent that?
So I think that based on some of what we've seen in terms of the both general research on the effects of exercise on the brain, promoting BDNF and neurotransmitter function, and I mean all these wonderful things, and the way that we've seen the newbie amplify the overall benefits of exercise, including those on mood and cognitive function, and the effect on the autonomic nervous system, which is crucial for good health and recovery and long-term uh, health during the aging process. I think there's a chance that this can really make an impact as part of an overall, Walls protocol included lifestyle.
Mhm. Correct. I mean, ultimately, I will still get gray hair, white hair. Clearly, it is graying. So obviously, some effects of aging are still going to occur. However, I want to have health span through that whole time. I want to have the best brain possible, the best energy possible, the strongest bones, the strongest muscles, and I certainly see Newbie as part of that strategy for me.
I love that. And there's one thing, we see videos and we share them from time to time. In the amateur track and field, for instance, there's a 90 and over age division, and there's people who are competing in track and field and sprinting and throwing javelins, in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I think these are inspiring examples of what's possible. It just takes work. It's use it or lose it is one side of the coin, and then if you're diligent and consistent, you can do, have that health span and be even active till 120.
That's the plan. When I talk to some of my other research scientists, they tell me that they have this big goal of doing well to their 90s. And I'm like, no, why have such a small goal? Like, oh my God, let's go for 120. And I'm waiting for someone to challenge me up to 150. So
Well,
we'll
our
see.
our mutual friend Dave Asprey, he has his stated goal of living to 180,
Yeah.
and that's there's
Well, time will tell.
potential. Yeah, we'll find out.
And we don't really know what the upper limit is, but I certainly know what my decision is about my daily choice, and that's pretty straightforward. I'm going to take great care of myself. I'll be sure that I'm protecting my sleep, have some meditation time, and have exercise time. And I love having exercise with my Neubie. Now, one thing we didn't ask, when I was a kid on the farm, we'd grab the electrical wires for the electrical fence that would keep the cows in shape. And that'd be a farm trick, was see how long could you hang on to the wire without letting go. And when you have siblings, doing that to each other, we shocked ourselves quite a few times. But many people they're hearing about electricity, hearing about the Neubie, they're afraid, like, oh my God, this must sound so painful, that if we're doing Neubie to get stronger. So could you talk about what the person might experience uh, while they're getting current?
That's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Um, so we've talked about how you have to be consistent, you have to put in the work, and when we say putting in the work, that also means that the sessions can be fairly intense in the sense that we're going to ask you, Dr. Walls, ask you, whoever's listening, to push yourself outside your comfort zone. So in terms of overall, we have to be uncomfortable in order to drive adaptation, because if we're comfortable, there's no reason for our brains to invest the energy and resources to make change in the first place.
Mhm.
So there has to be some degree of intensity. The question is, how do we do that in a safe and sustainable way? And so that's part of why I really like the machine, because we can get a lot more recruitment, activation of muscles without having to lift heavy weights or do some of the risky activities that we otherwise would have to do. And then in
Mhm.
terms of the machine, we do want to turn it up to a point where it feels fairly intense, but it is engineered to be pleasant. So like traditional direct current devices typically would sting and burn the skin, and we've eliminated all of that through some of the waveform engineering. And then when it is intense, it'll feel like a muscle contracting if you were doing a movement on your own, or it'll feel sometimes like you're getting into a trigger point area. So it would feel that type of sensation. It's typically nothing that's excessively uncomfortable. Some people really like it and
Mhm.
and find it to be rather pleasant. And we can always be, especially in the beginning or even at any time, we can be more conservative with the level of current because we're still getting the input in there. So it's really, you're in control. You kind of choose your own adventure, because you
Yeah.
can you can always turn the machine down. You can always um, use a lower level of power if you choose.
And again, to anyone who's listening, what I really want you to understand is when you're in control of the level of intensity, it's a very different experience than if someone else is in control. And so I've always found these sessions to be quite manageable. And so that is not, I think, a problem for most folks. And obviously, you can work with your therapist to get to the level of intensity that works for you. And what I experienced, and what I think most patients will experience, is the more sessions that you do, the more comfortable and pleasurable this becomes. And so over time, you'll take more current, and it will feel quite comfortable, and you'll be able to take more and more current over time. And now, Garrett, you can weigh in on this. Is this because my pain tolerance got better? Is this because my nervous system healed? Is it because my brain is reinterpreting those sensations in a more pleasurable way as opposed to a more painful way? Or is it a combination of all of those factors?
That's an excellent question, and ultimately we believe it's a combination of those types of factors. In terms of the ability to take higher current, a lot of it is due to legitimate adaptations in the nervous system. And just like if your muscles start at a point where you can only lift 10 pounds, but then you get stronger and your muscles can lift 20 pounds, they're legitimately stronger, either bigger, either the muscles fibers have grown, or you're able to activate more of them, or a combination. Whatever it is, the capacity of that muscle is greater, and so too will the capacity of your nerves increase. It's like having a very slow internet connection that only sends a couple megabytes per second to having a super duper internet connection that sends a few hundred megabytes per second. So part of it is your nervous system actually can conduct better, more higher capacity, faster speeds, literally an upgrade of the nervous system. And then part of it is also the processing in the brain. And if the brain perceives any sort of stimulus as being threatening, it's going to trigger pain. Pain is an output signal from the brain, and the brain triggers pain in response to any sort of perceived threat. And so in the beginning, because you're getting signal, especially if you've had impairments and areas have been weakened or haven't been working recently, that signal can be, because it's so new, can be perceived as threatening. And then over time, part of the adaptation that we want to see is for the brain to downregulate that perception of threat and allow higher levels of activity, because our brains will actually limit us as a protective mechanism. So when that changes, that tells us the brain is lifting
Mhm.
off those protective governors and actually allowing us to use more of our capacity.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got people fired up about this technology, and we'll say first for the clinicians who are hearing this, like, oh my gosh, I want to be able to refer my patients to a new fit trained person. How would they find someone? If I wanted to refer my patients to your types of therapy.
So for everyone listening to this, the best resource to go to is probably going to be a special page we created for the Walls Warriors. It's new.fit. So it's www.neu, like neurological, neu.fit/walls. And if people go there, there will be a link to our locations where you can find a provider, and hopefully there will be someone near you. There's also some other resources and things if you want to do a deeper dive, and different ways that we can potentially be of service to you, possibly help you on your journey, whether it's referring you to somebody else, or if there's an opportunity to work directly, or if it's a clinician, ways where we can connect and talk with you to explore whether this technology might be a good fit for your practice.
So, so patients, we've got resources for you to figure out how to search for someone in your area. And if you're a professional, another thing you can do is work with Garrett's team and get trained to offer this in your clinic. And so there might be chiropractors, physical therapists, occupational therapists. What other professions might want to get trained to have this in their clinical space?
So definitely, like you mentioned, PTs, OTs, chiropractors, other integrative medical practices we've seen. So some MDs and DOs have the device, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're operating it with their patients. That could mean they have someone on their team who they send to us, either
Mhm.
remotely or in person, to get trained and certified in it. So we can train someone on your team as long as they have some requisite uh, knowledge in physiology and the human body and such. So sometimes it's massage therapists or personal trainers who are using it, but it does have to be under the supervision of a licensed practitioner. So it's
Correct.
a
Correct.
range, but so integrative medical or pain management, there's some really, kind of a different realm, but some
Sure.
really solid applications there as well.
And people can sometimes just come directly to you in Austin. How would that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we mentioned Wendy's story about how she came down for a 5-day intensive, and thankfully things went well enough with her that she ended up renting a device and bringing it back home. And she continued to just, it was going well. She just continued to rent it. And eventually she just accumulated enough where, she had bought the machine, and then kept it and still keeps it, and or still has it and still uses it. So that's typically, if someone is interested in having a machine, it's best if you can find a practitioner near you and have someone to work with and guide you. But if that is, not accessible or time and cost
Mhm.
prohibitive, getting a machine and doing it at home is a viable option. And so ideally we'd like to get started in person, whether it's with us in Austin or another provider closer to you.
Mhm.
And then we have a team here who can consult with you remotely, get on video, observe movements, do remote assessments, help customize your program, and tweak it along the way so that you can continue to make as much progress as possible.
Now, one of the questions that people ask me from time to time is, do you have any plans for creating any of these smaller homegoing units that, there are smaller e-stim devices available on the internet that have, very much smaller power. And so people ask about those devices. They ask if you have a comparable smaller device at home. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is certainly nice. It's nice to have, the smaller form factor and something more portable. Like you and I obviously both have our devices on carts, and it's not something you can just pop in your pocket and go walk outside with or something like that. So we are working on taking our same technology, this base technology of direct current, combination of waveforms, the highest power allowed by law, or at least the FDA here in the United States, and we are actively working on ways to miniaturize that
Mm,
same signal generating mechanism. So we will have a smaller device out. The timeline is, because of various regulatory approvals and such, it's a little bit of a question mark as to
yeah,
how long it'll be. One of the things that I can commit to, though, is that for people who have our existing device, we'll have some generous upgrade programs, or kind of trade-in programs. We definitely want to take care of the early adopters, and
sure.
um, so we'll certainly share once we have
So
a better sense of the timeline. We'll share that too.
yeah, so the big message is we don't have it yet. We're working on it, and I know it can take a while to navigate all of the regulatory hurdles. But there are many ways you can access the device, which I really, really like. Um, I don't know that we've stressed enough that um, Garrett has a very, I think, unique perspective. He is doing eSTEM more through an athletic lens as part of this rehab. And that's why I think he's so successful. That is why his device and his programs, I think, are so much more successful than the other device, which um, don't have programs behind it, don't have the understanding of the neurophysiology and the rehab potential. So if you're able to get access to his device, man, I think it's some of the best investment you could possibly make on your making progress in your rehabilitation. Well, we've talked a long time, longer than what we thought we were going to, because it's just so much fun chatting with you, Garrett. Uh,
Likewise.
as we wrap things up, why don't you tell us where to find you again? Do you have any social media handles so that everyone can be aware of that as well?
Yes, absolutely. So just to mention again that the website page is new.fit/walls, and new is NEU, like neurological, neu.fit/WAHLS. And then we're most active on Instagram and Facebook. So on Instagram, our handle is Neufit RFP, for rehab, fitness, and performance, Neufit RFP. And then same on Facebook. But Instagram, we're on there a lot. Love to interact with people. So So if you're on there, please check us out. We'd love to see you on the platform.
Well, as always, Garrett, it is just such a pleasure chatting with you. I look forward to continually working with you and watching what new progress you make.
Thank you, Dr. Walls. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I love and want to acknowledge the model that you set. You truly practice what you preach, and you're walking the walk, and you're an inspiration to hundreds of thousands of people. So thank you.
Much love to you and your team.